Hello, my name is Dan Brown at danbrowncgi.com, aka J Daniels at blenderartist.org. I got too many names. Anyway, this is an answer to some tutorial requests that I received that asked how I do my space scenes. And so today, hopefully, you'll learn something from how I do it. It's not the best way, probably. I'd recommend looking up some other tutorials too online. I believe that Blender Guru Andrew Price has a couple space scene tutorials that he's done as well, and they're very good because he does that for a living, I guess, and I do not. I don't do tutorials a lot, and I'm not very good at it. But anyway, I hope this helps at least a little to show you how I do it. I do it because I do it my way, because the results look like an 80s kind of sci-fi movie. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, and then even late 90s, they were doing a lot of model work too, up until 2000 or so in the movies in Hollywood. And one of the best scenes is Episode 1, Star Wars, where they have the Federation battleships in orbit of Naboo. In the opening shot, that it's photorealistic. It looks real. I thought anyway, it's my opinion, but it was beautiful. And so that's the beauty of physical models. However, physical models have limitations that digital models do not have. The problem is that digital models all too often look digital, like they were made in a computer. Hopefully this gets around it a little. It at least emulates pretty much what the physical models used to look like, and that's what I like. Also going to show you how to use a freely available model off of Blend Swap to make a background, because people asked how do I do the star fields. It's actually very simple. The entire scene setup is very simple and actually doesn't take a lot of time. What does take time is building the ship model itself, which still takes months, especially for a highly detailed model. And for that, I'm really not going to be able to do a tutorial on how to build a spaceship. I had several people, quite forcibly some, ask me to make a tutorial. I gotta make a tutorial on how you design a spaceship and how you build it. Yeah, that's not going to happen. I'm sorry. I really am. The problem is with it is that it takes 2 months to build one of these things, and it's not going to work. I'm behind on my projects with my clients and stuff. This tutorial was supposed to be done yesterday, but it ended up having technical issues. It's just blah. So anyway, hopefully this tutorial helps you. To show you how it starts, we're going to go to, let's fix this first. Okay, there we go. Alright, so I'm going to show you. It's just, the file that I use for the background is Earth in Cycles by Adriano, I think is how you pronounce the name. I'm not quite sure. I'm sorry if I mispronounce it. Earth in Cycles is found on blendswap.com, blends view 52273. I'm going to put this link in the description of the video when I upload it to YouTube. Anyway, I've had nothing but success with this file. It's a really, really, really good file. If you want to know how I design a spaceship, I recommend going to blenderartist.org. Focus critique, go to the giant spaceship thread. Wow, it's going down. Oh no. Alright, giant spaceship thread. And it's post number 1222, and I'll provide this link as well. And basically you just scroll down and you follow the evolution of the model as I went from beginning to end. However, you'll notice that the first post is in July. That's how long it takes for me to build one of these things. That's why I really can't do a model. It's July 16th. I think I started on July 15th making this thing. So it was just blah. So anyway, that's that. So let's I'll show you what Earth in Cycles looks like. I downloaded it a long time ago and have since modified it so heavily that yeah, it's modified. So basically what you start with is the planets. You have your moon here. Yep, moon. And you have the atmosphere. And you have the planet. What's the planet texture here? Okay, it's the Earth texture that I downloaded off of NASA. If you'll notice, I have a camera. Let's delete that, and I'm going to re-add a camera to show you exactly what settings you want to use. First off, it's a very big scene, so you want to do probably 500 kilometers, and size would be 100 meters to make the camera visible. And then you rotate it whatever you want, whatever angle you want the camera to be at. Now, it's at perspective, 35 millimeter right now. You don't want that. You want to go to panoramic, equirectangular. Now, you'll notice nothing changed. That's because in equirectangular, it doesn't work yet. You're not gonna get what you want yet. So, equirectangular. All the settings should be correct on the model, except you want to create an equirectangular setup for your dimensions of your image, of your render image. And what that does is it sets up the size of, you want a very large image. Trust me on this. Very, very large. The reason for that is you get a small image and you'll get a lot of pixelation and artifacts in the final product. So you want as large as you can, but for brevity's sake, what we're going to do is we're just going to set it to 25% size so that we get what we want. So you hit render. I'm doing CPU rendering here, but you probably might get away with GPU rendering. I have a 2 GB graphics card, but it doesn't work. Okay, here we go. When I'm capturing video. So, as you can see, there's some distortion in the don't worry, don't panic. That's normal. That's the way it's supposed to be. Then it does a second pass where he has the atmosphere. Pass. And finally, you have the third pass, which I'm going to show you in a second exactly what it is. The third pass is a star field. This is an actual like photograph NASA did of the 360-degree panoramic view of the Milky Way galaxy. So this is 360 degrees is what you're seeing, and 360 degrees this way. The whole image is 360 degrees both directions. The computer takes that image, right, and it takes this whole square that you see and wraps it around the camera in the final scene. So what you want to do is you want to go to image, save as image, and then save it as a very large JPEG with maximum size, maximum quality, because you're going to get artifacts pretty bad. I have a number of these, but that I'd like to show you. Pictures, textures, skies. I'm gonna reorganize this. Okay, BG Pano. You'll notice, for those of you some of you, one of you or two, you might remember this background as I'd used it in the 2012 demo reel that I did. This is the equirectangular background image. Now you'll notice there's some distortion at the bottom. That's because this has to be conformed to a 360-degree sphere around the camera in the backdrop. So it may not look right when it's flattened out, and it's not supposed to look like when it's flattened out. Look at the light. This is not right. But that's because this is on one side of the camera and this is on the other. We're actually in the center here. So that's how an equirectangular background image works. I have a bunch of them here. I even have one for something. Ooh, this is kind of secret. Oopsie. And it's a project that'll never get done anyway. Huh. So anyway, that's the way it is. So, to show you what is going on here, I have something else I want to show you before I close this file out. You'll notice some people ask how I do my star field. It is very literally just that. It's that picture that's included in that file, Earth in Cycles on BlendSwap. That's the picture. That's the file, and you download that, and it's included in it, I believe. I'm pretty sure. I didn't get this anywhere else. And it's a very large file, but this is the star field that I use. It's a real life star field. Just to give you an example. So now you have your file. Now you have your backdrop that you've saved, hopefully in a nice place you can easily find it. Now we go to our spaceship model. So we have our little spaceship model here. This is the adamant. And what we're going to do is do that first. Okay. So what happens is you create a world environment. I'll show you how. Create new world, and we'll call it the new world. It is the new world. And so you have the new world. Now, yeah, that should be okay. Let's see if this crashes. It's doing it? It did it! Yay! Okay, that's so great. Alright. So we have here our adamant model. Oh, we don't have lights. Let's add a light. Ah! What is that? Like this. Yay, okay, there we go. Yeah, this model is a bit crazy. I still have some things to do with it. Anyway, I'm gonna get rid of this so we can see our world. Okay, so here we go. We have our regular gray world, a new world. You want to set it to background, then go to color and add environment texture. Whoa, pink! Whoa, pink. Okay, we don't want that. We want to do skies. And which one shall we use? Thracia? Yeah. There we go. Alright. So, what's hopefully going to happen is, there we are. There's our backdrop image, and we have a planet down below. Wow. There's a tear in the cloud. Anyway, another thing you'll observe is, look at the lighting effects. That blue light, it's coming from down there. Blender is using the equirectangular background to use it as an illumination map. So it looks awesome. It's very realistic. So there you go. Now we have our background, and no matter where you look, it looks awesome. I was at least expecting a little distortion, but I don't see any. Huh. Anyway, so there you go. And there's your model. Now, what we want to do next is show something else, your camera settings. Camera settings are important for your model, because you want it you want it to look good. Now, there are two things I want to point out about camera settings really quick here. Get rid of these. test thing, and it didn't really work out that well. Anyway, we'll move you over here. Yeah, okay. So we have this perspective camera over here, and it's set to a ridiculous focal length because I wanted to fill the scene, fill the shot with it. It's gotta move. I apologize for the jerkiness of the video, especially the OpenGL display, because I've got 1.6 million faces. I gotta optimize this thing still. I got a lot more work to do on this baby. Be a while. So there we are. So I never use the cloud generator, so I think I'll put myself down there. Why do I even have you? Anyway, so what we have here is our perspective camera set to a focal length of 303 millimeters. Now, when you do CGI, obviously you're using camera stuff. Like, you have to learn how to do focal lengths, and most of you know that already, so that's great. But for those of you who don't know how to do a focal length literally means how wide of an angle your field of view is. The narrower the field of angle, the more stacked up everything is, the less depth perception there seems to be, and the less you can see, but you can be farther away from something. It's like zooming in on a camera. That's what you're doing. Conversely, the wider the camera angle, the broader the field of view, and the smaller everything appears, and also distances increase in perspective. In reality, the distances stay the same. But anyway, what you're doing with spaceships is what you're seeing here is an orthographic view. The orthographic view shows everything in its exact, unaltered dimensions. This wingspan is exactly that much wider than this hammerhead, and it is exactly the same no matter what direction you look at. The only reason it looks like it changes because the human brain forces it to imagine that there's a perspective, but there really isn't. There's no perspective in this. On the other hand, perspective gives you depth perception. Now, things are, the closer the object is, the farther away it is, it affects its relative size in what we see, what we perceive as its relative size and proportion. Is much more natural. So the closer things are, the bigger they are, and farther away is farther away. Isn't that cool? So anyway, when you're doing spaceships, a lot of what some people notice, what some people have observed when they're starting, and what I found out pretty early on, is notice this. This is a 35 millimeter view. Now, 35 millimeter is the closest to the human eye that you can, I guess is what I hear anyway. I could be wrong. But this is 35 millimeter then. And the butt of the spaceship is huge. It's very big. You've got this big it's a mile wide, so it's pretty huge. But notice how much wasted space there is on the screen. Now, it's very dynamic and impressive. But the result is it just doesn't, it's a lot of wasted space. However, notice the front. Now the front dominates the scene. It takes over the whole thing. You can't really, it's unbalanced. It ruins the aesthetics of the ship. These ships were designed really to actually be viewed in orthographic view. All spaceships really were, to a large extent, because they were designed in orthographic view. And sadly, I don't know why, it just seems that way. Anyway, what I found is the golden angle for the adamant Palatine class model that I built was 75 millimeters. Now notice that there's still perspective, but it's not as pronounced. The ship has been squashed. Literally, it looks shorter. However, it actually makes the ship look bigger. It's more imposing on the screen. It dominates the screen now. It's much bigger and occupies much more space, so it makes the ship look beefier, more menacing, bigger, more glorious, if you will. And that's the purpose. Whenever you see, especially in the old days when they did real physical models, they would build a 5 to 10 foot long physical model, usually out of clear plastic, and then paint it, and then scratch little holes and have the lights shine through. The result was a physical model. Anyway, they would shoot the model using a high, narrow angle lens, and every time you see a starship or something in Star Trek or Star Wars or something, whenever they show it from the front, they use a very narrow angle lens and they smash everything up. So you usually will use around a 95, I believe, is the biggest I saw. The narrowest angle lens I've ever seen on a starship, there's two of them I think in the movies I've seen. One was in Empire Strikes Back, when the Millennium Falcon is directly in front of a Star Destroyer and you see the Star Destroyer. That Star Destroyer was filmed probably from a considerable distance away, and they used a very a narrow angle lens to just mash that thing. The other one was the opening scene of Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, where the Excelsier's floating toward you. They used a very, very, very narrow angle lens too to mash that ship up. There's no perspective on it. It's very, 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 very mashed up, and it looks good that way. Now, keep that in mind. I'm getting somewhere with this. The reason is you use that to mash up the ship from the front. All too often, the front of a starship will dominate the scene. You don't want that. You want the back of the starship to look wider than the front. It makes the ship look, I don't know, beefier, like it's got shoulders, and it looks impressive. However, it's the opposite on the rear end of the ship. You want to use a lower angle lens. This gives the impression of speed. The ship looks like it's stretching off into eternity. Everybody knows that shot I'm referring to in Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope, where the blockade runner, Tantive, flies overhead, and then you have Darth Vader's Star Destroyer go, and it just keeps going and going and going. They used a very wide-angle lens for that to give the impression of speed and distance. So you want to change your camera angle, your lens angle, to fit what direction you want your ship and what feeling you want your ship to impress on the viewer, in other words. The second thing that you definitely want to do is in your scene settings. Your scene settings are here under this little button here, and you want to go down and color management. Usually it's closed, so you have to open it. Normally it's set to default with exposure of 0 and the gamma at 1. Gamma usually I don't play with, but film is the setting I prefer to use for this. What it does is it simulates what it would look like on celluloid film, which is what they use to film these spaceships in these 80s movies. So that's what you want to do. The result, I don't feel like rendering it, so I'll show you. The result is found here. Let's do the misanthropic retreat. This is the same starfield. The camera angle on this was, I want to say 80. I could be wrong, but nevertheless, it made the stars look bigger, but also I set it to film setting so that everything looked more contrasty, duller to an extent. I can't explain that. The color management was messed up, and the stars popped. And the thing is when you do that, you get a pretty good, effect on the stars. It makes it look very, very bluish, kind of, and very good. The other thing you want to do, the last thing you want to do, is any movement, you want to turn on motion blur. Now, this is a big deal. I'm going to show you something. Back when I first started with Ploggerus, for one thing, Cycles was a godsend to us, because it made things so simple. We were able to literally block out a scene, drag and drop elements into it that had already had Cycles textures or materials assigned to it, literally put a light, usually it's just a sun lamp, and put a camera. And everything else was taken care of. It was that simple, that fast, that easy. Cycles was great. I would not have been able to make Ploggerus if it hadn't been for Cycles. However, back then they didn't have a motion blur. And if you had a lot of movement on screen, it didn't look good. Space scenes especially suffered. And here's why. A lot of people complain that their star fields flicker when the camera moves. That is unavoidable to a large extent, and here is why. Stars are tiny, and oftentimes they're smaller than the pixels on your screen. And other things too, like compression of video also can take those stars out. So what happens is, as they move between the pixels and the compression on the video can conspire too, it literally starts to flicker and it looks terrible. One way to get around that is with motion blur. You blur the stars and they cover more space, and it looks better anyway because stars would blur as the camera pans. Cycles didn't do that, so we had to do something else. And so what we did was we had a background pass and a foreground pass. The background pass was done using literally a sphere that had like a noise, just a noise thing, a noise modifier on it, a noise texture on it, and that's all I did. And that sphere had a camera inside, and the camera was with the same camera that was found in the later shot, the foreground element, but the background element we just used. The you can still see some flickering. We just used the we just used Blender internal for this, and then the planet in the background was a plane with an alpha map and a texture that a friend of mine on Blender Artist made. So right there, that's it. Then we rendered the foreground element in Cycles using an alpha map. Now notice as you do this that it looks okay, the lighting is pretty good until you get about here. There is no motion blur. There should be at this point. It looks fake. It doesn't look right. In this opening shot, though some people asked how I did it and they were impressed, today it really doesn't hold up to what Cycles can do. To give you an impression of what Cycles can do now, this is what Ploggerus should look like, what it would have looked like if I had rendered it today. Notice the star field. and it's done in the film setting. And as you get here, I also changed the camera angle to something more pleasing. I didn't like the old camera angle. As you get here, you start to see motion blur. This is all one pass. There is no multiple passes. The compositing is over, and there you go. It's beautiful. Motion blur makes the image complete. It makes it look like a photograph. This is what Plagiaris should have looked like, except the planet is wrong. It's not Plagiaris, it's like a kind of an earthy planet. But it gives the impression of what it should look like. What is this? Ooh. Yeah, that's what Plagiaris should look like. I don't like the zoom out. I don't know why I did that. But yeah, that's what Plagiaris should look like now. But it doesn't, obviously, look like that. So I hope that this gives you some impression of what it's supposed to look like, how you do it. Basically, what you do, to sum up, you take that file off of Blend Swap. You then make an equirectangular backdrop, save it as a huge file. You want it as a huge file. You save it that way, and then you drag and drop it into a world setting, a world file, a world inside your ship model. You then set it to equirectangular, and that's it. That's your world. And then you take your camera and your ship and you set it up that way. You set your camera to a narrow angle lens. The narrow angle should be narrower for the front when you're photographing from the front of your ship, and slightly wider when you're photographing from the back of your ship. The other thing is you want to have the film setting and motion blur set up. And the downside of the film setting that I should mention is that you're going to really limit your ability for color correction. The best way to do color correction is to do it, I believe, log or raw. I can't remember which one it is now. It looks terrible. However, in post-production, you have a broader range of brightness and contrast settings and other things like that. So color correction is easier. I hope this tutorial helped you. Again, I apologize. I'm not that good at tutorials. It's just not what I do. And this one has had nothing but technical issues. I made one earlier yesterday and it ended up terrible. I hope this one ends up better. So just to say goodbye, I hope everybody's doing okay, and I hope you're happy blending. Alright, bye.